Some new housing market data is out, and according to the Cromford Report, this is very disappointing. We're going to take a look at that today. Plus, can we talk about mortgage rates? Holy moly. I'm recording this on Tuesday, but by the time you guys see it, things could change again. Rates have been on a downward path. We're going to talk about that, and also how you can sell your house for $1. Let's get into it. Thank you for joining me, you guys. So the Cromford Report is looking at the listings under contract. And if you remember, last week we took a look at this here in Phoenix because this is showing how our demand is changing. And I was kind of curious because mortgage rates have been going down. So is that reflected in these listings under contract? And you know what? It's interesting because the Cromford Report is breaking these down by price range. Okay, so this first graph here, they're looking at the market over $1 million, and the red line is this year. So you can see that we've had an increase in listings under contract in recent weeks in the market over $1 million. Interesting to see that the mortgage rates most likely affected the decision for people in this price range to, or buyers in this price range to kind of get out there, right? So now they're looking here on this second one, the second graph, the $2 to $10 million range is slightly down compared to a year ago. Now there's 10 homes over 10 million under contract, which is 30% higher than the 7 we saw last year at this time. So we are seeing in this 2 to 10 million range, we're also seeing listings under contract increase. Now, when we look at 500,000 to $1 million, the increase over last year is 5.4% and 14.8% compared with September of 2023. But the market under 500,000 is not seeing much of a change at all. So they're saying this is a pretty disappointing thing to see because we know that prices are lower this year compared to last year and 2023, and yet we are not seeing listings under contract outpace the number of listings under contract over the last 2 years, meaning that we just don't have the buyer demand. Even though prices are lower, we're still not seeing that affected in that 500,000 and below range. So what does this mean? It means that the entry-level market is still kind of suffering from below normal demand. So if you are someone looking to sell your home and it's worth less than 500,000, just know that buyers aren't jumping off the sidelines to get into the mix right now. We're really not seeing that demand recover. Now, might that change over the next few weeks? Possibly, because let's look at what's going on with mortgage rates. Oh my gosh, look at this graph. Okay, 6.13 today. This is Tuesday, the 16th. We were just at 6.25 on Monday. We ended last week around 6.29. Everyone was very excited about that, but 6.13, we are getting awfully close to 6% rates. So what happened here? Because the Fed rate cut isn't until tomorrow. Well, that is because the Fed rate cut has nothing to do with how mortgage rates are affected, right? So depending on what happens tomorrow, obviously you guys might know this by the time you're watching this video because I'm recording this on Tuesday. But what Jerome Powell says is going to weigh heavier than what they actually do. We're all pretty certain that they're going to do a 25 basis point cut tomorrow. That's not going to be a big surprise, but it's more so what Chairman Powell says and any other commentary related to how the economy is doing. This article by Housing Wire is pointing out that Fed rate cuts have already been priced into mortgage rates, essentially, right? They're saying last year at this time, mortgage rates fell to nearly 6%, and the Fed cut rates only to see mortgage rates shoot back up to 7.25%. So is that possible? Could tomorrow's announcement actually change rates in the opposite direction? It's possible. A lot of the movement in mortgage rates, again, is really coming from economic news. So last week, jobs report was or maybe 2 weeks ago now, jobs report came out to be quite a bit weaker than expected. And so that's why we saw this, this change on mortgage rates. So just keep that in mind that no matter what happens tomorrow, however they cut the federal funds rate, it is not directly affecting the cuts on mortgage rates. Rather, it could actually increase mortgage rates depending on what is said. So what Logan Motoshami is saying in this article is that last year at this time, the 10-year yield reached 3.63%. That was pricing in a recession at that point. Fed policy was too restrictive. Fed cut rates by 0.50%, but the more critical variable was that the economic data was improving. So bond yields shot up. That's what happened last year. However, the difference is that the labor data was significantly better last year than it is this year. The current situation, the labor market is much softer. Mortgage spreads are much better in 2025. So we don't have a similar backdrop as the 10-year yield is at 4.07% and not 3.63%. If labor data improves and inflation remains above target, the 10-year yield should rise, taking mortgage rates higher with it. So again, just referring back to this economic news is what's weighing heavier than what the Fed actually says. And right now we've been seeing a lot of weakness in the labor market, which has been more so what rates have been reacting to. But holy moly, 6.1% is looking pretty good compared to where we've been over the last year. So if you've been someone waiting for rates to come down, they're down. Maybe they'll continue to go down. Hard to know for sure, but they've made some pretty big moves. Now, I always talk about assumable mortgages, so I'm not going to say that's not a viable option anymore because, hey, if you can get a 4.3 or 2.9% rate on a house these days, let's do it. So if you're interested in how assumable mortgages work, make sure to check the description below for more information. Now, I touched on the market here in Phoenix and Canadian buyers actually selling their properties, or I guess Canadian owners selling their properties here in the Phoenix area. And I think that was in maybe Q2 this year. We were seeing a lot of that taking place, right? So I find this interesting because this is nationally. The number of Canadians searching for U.S. homes is down 20% from last year. Our market is definitely a draw for a lot of Canadian buyers. We do see a lot of snowbirds, as we call them, buying here. But it appears that we're not the only market affected, that the number of Canadians buying in the U.S. is down 20%, and that's across the board. So why do we care about this? Well, we know in the Phoenix market, we do get a lot of buyers coming from Canada. And so seeing that this is affected because of some economic policies, in particular, tariffs were implemented. We've definitely seen this effect now. We talked about how a lot of Canadian homeowners were selling, and we were kind of seeing that trend. Now we're seeing that they may not be coming back, may not be buying because of tariffs. Obviously, difference in the dollar and the exchange rate. A lot of different things can affect this, but certainly seems to be a trend. And we know that most likely here in Phoenix, we are going to see this impacting us, even though this is just national news. So if you're planning on selling your home and you have the perfect lock and leave home for a snowbird, just know that that group of buyers is dwindling a little bit. Now, not to say we can't have snowbirds from other areas of the U.S. We still have that kind of demand, but Canadian buyers have always been a good part of our market, and it appears that that might be slowing down. Now, let's talk about how you can sell your house for $1, because who would want to do that? Before we get there, if any of this is helpful for you, consider subscribing and sharing this channel with someone who would find it interesting. So there is someone who tried to raffle off their home here in Arizona, and that is not legal. However, there are some other ways to kind of create the same type of environment, which has been taking place. So I'm not sure if you've heard about this, but a Phoenix homeowner tried to raffle off his $1.3 million mountainside estate for a $10 ticket this month, which does seem like a creative way to do something. However, it is a big no-no to raffle off anything in real estate because it is considered an illegal gambling operation. We learned this in real estate school. You can't do any sort of raffles and that kind of thing, lotteries, essentially. So what happened, this homeowner was working with a UK-based raffle platform, promised one lucky ticket holder would win the fully remodeled home or cash payout depending on participation, but that got shot down. So what you can do is something more of a sweepstakes than a raffle. A raffle is it requires participants to pay for a chance to win. So that's what qualifies it as gambling. And a sweepstakes is giving you a little bit more flexibility. So if they include a no purchase necessary method of entry, depending on local laws and regulations, that crucial detail can turn what would otherwise be considered gambling or the lottery into a promotional contest. So either way, I don't know that I would be touching this if I was trying to sell someone's home, just because I don't want to get caught up in that. But there is the $1 home listing strategy. And I think this is interesting. I've seen this on the MLS one time before, but according to Realtor.com, 512 homes were listed for $1 in June of 2025, which is an 82.9% increase from the same time in 2023. I think that's so interesting. And so basically you're creating an auction because, we all know the house is worth more than $1, right? And seeing how far these bidders are going to go, but it's not actually gambling. It's not illegal. You're not messing with the sweepstakes. It's just really pricing extremely aggressively to get some interest. Now, I always talk with my clients about this pricing strategies that we can use. In fact, I did a video about this not long ago, but it's really important to think about when you're listing your home about the pricing strategy you're using rather than the actual price, because depending on how you list your home, it will determine what type of activity you get. Obviously, making it more of a competitive price is going to get you a lot more traction. And oftentimes in my experience, I see that my sellers end up with a higher sales price when they use that method versus starting very high and having to take price cuts along the way. So this is just an extreme method of doing that, starting at $1. But apparently for 512 people this year, they've taken the leap, and I'd be curious to know how that turned out for them. Now, I know many of you have watched Ivy Zelman, are familiar with her, and have researched some of her information. I wanted to share this. Unfortunately, it's not in an article. It's only a video, but you can check this out if you want to see the video. I'll link it below. But she was recently interviewed saying that home prices will dip in 2026 before rebounding in 2027. Now, a lot of what she's talking about is new construction and how builders have been able to offer incentives to really offset the mortgage rates, and they've been doing this for a while. So as mortgage rates continue to go lower, they're still going to be able to offer these incentives to buy down your rate for 1, 2, 3 years. And it will be a little bit more affordable for them to do that as rates continue to go down. She talks about how price cuts are running a little bit hotter than usual in 2025 compared to previous years, and how builders have an oversupply of spec inventory, which is why they are willing to do all of these incentives, especially on their spec inventory. So if you've been someone considering new construction, it is a good time to be taking a look at the incentives that they're offering. I have a link below where you can request more information and take a look at new construction options here in the Phoenix area. We've been tracking our active listing counts week to week, and this graph here shows the trend pretty well. At the beginning of the year, we saw a lot of new listings hitting the market. Our active listing inventory piled up, climbed to a peak in about May, then has come down over the summer, and now we've got about 4 weeks of an increase in active inventory as we are getting into September. So keep in mind, I mentioned this last week, lower rates, great for buyers, great for sellers thinking that they're going to get more activity on their listings, which they likely are. However, it's also bringing out more sellers, more people who say, great, the market is warming up again. Buyers want to jump in because it's more affordable with lower rates. I'm now going to list my house. So what I can say anecdotally, I have seen an increase in showing activity on my active listings. However, that said, if more sellers come on the market, that means buyers are going to have more choices and maintain that upper hand. So a win-win for you buyers as mortgage rates are going down and maybe supply increases. You continue to maintain more control over the market with a little bit more affordability in those lower rates. Now, the CMI this week has increased 81.3. We are in the 80s now, but still considered a buyer's market as anything under 90 is considered a buyer's market. Demand at 79, so about 21% below normal. Supply 97.1, so about 3% below normal. Still seeing this difference in supply and demand, which is why we're in a buyer's market. However, this has been increasing, and you can see we do have a lot of green arrows again on these major cities. This is the CMI related to each major city and the change month over month, what direction they went. Green increase means that it went in a direction towards a seller's market. A red down arrow is towards a buyer's market. Now, the difference, however, is we saw a few weeks of acceleration. So when we take the average change month over month with all of these major cities, we were seeing a positive change. So all of these numbers were, increasing, going towards the seller's market. Now, for the last 2 weeks, we have now seen a downward trend. The average monthly change this week was 7.6%, while last week we saw 8.4%. The week before that was in the 9% range. So we're obviously seeing this dwindle a little bit. So although we are seeing mortgage rates come down, we're likely seeing some buyers getting off the fence and jumping in. We're also seeing those listings start to creep up. And the Cromford Report is saying that the pace of arrival of new listings right now is higher than it's been in the last 2 years during this time of year. So we're going to have to keep an eye on that, because while it seems like things might start to take off with rates coming down, the amount of new listings hitting the market could really halt some of that progress to where it's not going as quickly as anticipated. And we really only have a couple months of this market with the opportunity for it to be pretty busy and hot before we get into that holiday timeframe where everything pretty much slows down. So we'll have to see what happens over the next few months. If you're unsure what to do in this market as a buyer or a seller, or even considering investing, check the description below. I have a link for a free discovery call with our team. We can talk more about your situation and help you in the right direction. Thanks for joining me. I will see you guys next week on my next market update.